Welcome to the debate. Imagine your suffering is so visually horrific, so far beyond the limits of human endurance, that your closest friends look at you, tear their clothes, and actually begin performing your funeral rites.
While you are still breathing, no less.
Exactly, while you're still sitting right there. Usually when we study ancient texts, especially in biblical theology, we expect clear cosmological boundaries.
Right, there's a neat division.
Yeah, exactly. There is the sacred and the profane, the divine and the mortal. But the most absolute, really, the most impenetrable boundary of all is the one between the living and the dead.
It is the ultimate demarcation in ancient Near Eastern thought, honestly. The narrative reality in these texts is usually strictly binary. You are either breathing in the land of the living, participating in the praise of God, or you have crossed over into Sheol, which is that cosmological holding place totally devoid of divine presence.
A realm of utter silence.
Right, utter silence and darkness. It's supposed to be a categorically clean break.
But then, you step into the world of the book of Job, and suddenly that fundamental boundary isn't just blurred, it is practically obliterated.
It really is.
So, for the theology students and biblical scholars joining us today, our focus is an in-depth analysis of this exact intersection. We're going to examine the profound theological link between lamentation and death.
Specifically looking at that bizarre, highly ritualized interaction between Job and his three friends.
Right, because I'm looking at this text, and I just can't shake the feeling that they are actively treating him like a dead man. I mean, am I wrong to read this as a literal descent into Sheol?
Well, I think that's the core question of the text, isn't it?
I think so. So I'll take the position that the friends' ritualistic actions intentionally treated Job as a lost soul. They effectively pulled the narrative into the realm of Sheol, which makes his subsequent lament that of a literal dead man.
And I represent the view that Job's lament highlights the tragic paradox of a strictly living man experiencing a death-like state. I think it points directly to God's specific command in the heavenly council that Job not be killed.
So a paradox of biology, you'd say.
Exactly, yes. It's biology, not an actual relocation to the underworld.
Okay, well, let's break down the structural anomaly of this book first. When you step back and look at the text as a whole, it's 42 chapters total.
42, yeah.
But a staggering 40 of them are this dense, grinding poetry. It is completely unusual.
Oh, it's a massive shift in style.
Right, and based on the narrative trajectory of the prologue, that poetry was arguably never meant to be written. The narrative could have easily been, heavenly counsel, affliction, Job remains faithful, immediate restoration.
A neat, clean folktale.
Exactly. But the friends arrive, and they initiate a theological intervention. By enacting the ancient mourning practice of sitting Shiva, the weeping, the tearing of robes, throwing of dust, and those 7 days of absolute silence, they treat Job as a soul already residing in Sheol.
I mean, it's definitely the aesthetic of the great.
It is. And this isn't just an emotional reaction. It's an action that alters the reality of the text. Because they treat him as dead, Job's curses in chapter 3 are not the complaints of a sick man.
You're saying there's something else entirely.
Yeah, I'm saying they are a post-mortem judgment scene. They are the literal lament of a dead man speaking from the abyss.
I absolutely acknowledge the immense weight of that mourning imagery. It is undeniably the vocabulary of death, but I firmly ground my position in the prologue's explicit theological constraint.
The heavenly council scene?
Right. During that second council, God commanded the accuser, spare his life. That is the foundational, unbreakable boundary of the entire text.
Okay, but how does that negate the ritual?
Well, if you're a theology student listening to this, you're probably thinking, wait, how do you reconcile a literal death ritual with God's direct command to keep him alive?
Right, it seems contradictory.
The answer is that the friends are paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of living suffering. They do not have the theological authority to relocate his ontology to Sheol.
Interesting.
Yeah, so Job's lament in chapter 3 is a living man's desperate plea for non-existence. He is wishing for his birth to be unmade precisely because he is still trapped in the agonizing reality of a living, breathing body.
But let's look at the mechanics of the ritual itself, because we have to understand how these actions functioned in the ancient world. They aren't just, expressing sadness.
No, it's highly formalized.
Exactly. When we look at the text, specifically verses 12 and 13, it says that when they saw him from a distance, they didn't recognize him. They wept aloud, tore their robes, threw dust in the air upon their heads, and sat in silence for 7 days and 7 nights.
A profound reaction to trauma.
Yes, but in the ancient Near East, throwing dust on your head isn't just a physical display of grief. It is an ontological statement. You are symbolically returning to the dust. You are aligning the space with the curse of mortality from Genesis.
They are enacting the mechanical sequence of mourning. Sure.
Right. Let me give you an analogy. It's like a priest administering last rites to someone who is still clearly breathing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The ritual itself fundamentally alters the theological reality of the space. It plunges the narrative conceptually into Sheol. By using that vocabulary, they change his status in the narrative.
But I come at it from a slightly different way.
Go ahead.
The imagery is indeed that of sitting Shiva, but we have to read the exact motivation the Hebrew writer provides for that silence.
You mean the end of verse 13?
Yes. The verse concludes, "For they saw that his suffering was very great." It does not say, "For they saw that his spirit had departed."
Okay, fair point on the wording.
It explicitly tethers their reaction to his suffering. And suffering, especially on this visceral level, is fundamentally a condition of the living. Dead men in Sheol do not feel the agonizing scrape of potsherds against boils.
But they do feel the isolation.
Sure, but the friends are witnessing the extreme limits of human physical endurance. They didn't recognize him because of the physical devastation of a living body, not because he had become some sort of phantom.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, to be honest. It ignores the immediate cause and effect of the narrative structure.
How so?
Think about it. The ritual concludes, the 7 days of silence finally break, and what is the very first thing that happens? Job opens his mouth and delivers an ontological demand for uncreation in chapter 3.
He curses the day he was born, yes.
He doesn't ask for a physician, he doesn't ask for a new house or new flocks. He demands that the timeline of his existence be completely erased.
But let's be precise about what he's erasing.
Let's explain how curses worked in this context first. In the ancient Near East, a curse wasn't just a person, venting their frustration. It was believed to be a mechanical invocation, an active unraveling of creation.
A performative utterance, right?
Exactly. Job says, "Let the day perish in which I was born. Let thick darkness seize it. Let that night be barren. Let no joyful cry be heard in it."
Powerful imagery.
It is the authentic aesthetic of Sheol. He is demanding the void, that specific desire for no joyful cry, and the absolute darkness of the night. This is the exact environment of the underworld where praise ceases and silence reigns.
He's adopting the vocabulary, certainly.
Right. The friends treated him as legally dead in absentia, basically, and Job responds by adopting the exact posture of a soul in Sheol demanding eternal silence.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that interpretation of the lament. Let me tell you why.
All right, let's hear it.
If you look closely at the very verses you just quoted, they are saturated with inescapable biological specificity.
Biological? How so? The void is literally the absence of biology. He is asking for darkness.
He is asking for the darkness to consume his beginning, not his present state. Listen to the specific words the writer uses. A male is conceived, and later, because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb.
Okay, he references birth.
It's more than a reference. A soul that is native to Sheol, a true inhabitant of the realm of the dead, laments its current state of death. A dead man laments that he has lost the light of the sun, that he's been severed from the land of the living, right?
Usually, yes.
But Job is doing the exact opposite. Job is lamenting his entry into life.
But the end result he is asking for is exactly the same. He wants the darkness. He wants the uncreation.
The theological posture is vastly different, though. He is not speaking as a dead man who has accepted the eternal silence of Sheol. He is a fiercely living man who is trying to reverse engineer his own birth.
Unmake the conception entirely.
Yes. He wants to wind the cosmic clock back to before conception and have the doors of the womb shut. The biting theological tension of chapter 3 is that he is fully, painfully aware he is alive.
You're saying the pain of life is the driver.
Exactly. If he were already conceptually in Sheol, the plea to unmake his birth would lose its desperate edge. It is the agonizing awareness of his living, breathing consciousness that drives him to wish he had never drawn breath. He is trapped in the living world.
That is an interesting point, though. I would definitely frame it differently. Because if Job is truly begging for his birth to be unmade as a living man, as you argue,
Which the biology of the text supports.
even so, that fundamentally changes why the next 40 chapters of poetry even exist. Let's explore the purpose of this massive section of the text.
The poetry cycle?
Right. We mentioned earlier that the poetry is a structural anomaly. You have the prose prologue, which moves swiftly, almost like a standard folk tale, then suddenly a grinding halt. 40 chapters of dense, repetitive, circular arguments.
It is a massive shift in literary style and pacing, yes. It forces the reader into the mud with Job.
Right, and there is a theological mechanism behind that grinding halt. Our source material points out that we are quite lucky this poetry exists because it wasn't strictly necessary for the narrative wager.
The wager in the heavens could have been resolved without it, true.
Exactly. But because the friends sit Shiva, because they bring the actual mechanics of the death ritual into Job's living room, they force an impromptu judgment scene.
You view the whole middle section as a trial of the dead.
I do. I see why you think that Job is just a suffering living man, but let me give you a different perspective. This 40-chapter poetic dialogue is essentially an interaction in the underworld.
An underworld tribunal?
Job is lamenting from the dust, the friends are prosecuting him like inquisitors of the dead, and the entire middle of the book becomes a structural descent into Sheol. The ritual created the poetry.
That's a very compelling argument. But have you considered what happens to the cosmic wager if Job is actually in an underworld judgment scene?
What do you mean?
If this were a true post-mortem judgment in Sheol, then the entire theological framework of the book collapses.
I don't see how it collapses at all. I think it elevates the text to a cosmic courtroom.
It collapses because of the boundary God explicitly drew in the sand, but the accuser, do what you will with his possessions, do what you will with his flesh, but spare his life.
Right, the life constraint.
If the friend's ritual successfully pulls Job's ontology into Sheol, if he is functionally dead and operating in the underworld, then God's boundary has been broken. The accuser would have won on a technicality.
Oh, I see what you're getting at.
The text cannot allow that. The 40 chapters of poetry exist precisely because Job isn't dead.
But the text is explicitly trying to convey the atmosphere of Sheol. The writer wants us to view this dialogue through the lens of the realm of the dead. The friend's intention matters here.
Yes, it looks like Sheol. It definitely feels like Sheol. But if he were dead, there would be no debate.
Why not?
Because the silence of the 7 days would just continue eternally. Dead men don't spend 40 chapters fiercely debating divine justice with their peers.
That's a fair point on the silence of the grave.
Right. The sheer length of the poetry, this exhausting, repetitive cycle of speeches, represents the agonizing, drawn-out friction of a living man. It is the endurance of a man who refuses to die intellectually or spiritually, even when subjected to a literal death ritual by his closest companions.
So you see it as resistance.
Absolutely. He is fighting back against their theological framework. They treat him like a corpse, and he spends 40 chapters effectively screaming, "I am alive, and I demand an audience with the God of the living."
Well, I see the logic in viewing the poetry as his resistance to their death ritual. I do. But I still maintain that the ritual itself is the active ingredient of the text.
The catalyst for the dialogue.
Exactly. Without their weeping, without the torn robes, without the dust on their heads, we do not get the poetry. The friend's miscalculation, treating a living man as a legally dead entity, forces the ultimate lament of the dead into the open air of the living world.
It certainly creates a crisis.
A profound theological crisis. By dragging the vocabulary of Sheol into the land of the living, Job's demand for thick darkness and barrenness forces the reader to sit in the absolute darkness of the grave. We end up experiencing a reality where the boundary between life and death has practically collapsed.
And I continue to argue that the boundary has not collapsed, but rather Job is pressed so hard against it that he can literally feel the cold radiating from the other side.
The cold of Sheol.
Yes. The friends thought they were burying a man's spirit. They applied the ritual mechanics of death. But instead of actually transitioning him to Sheol, they merely provided the intense pressure under which Job's profound defense of his own living integrity was forged.
The crucible, essentially.
Right. The silence the ritual ultimately forces upon the reader isn't the silence of the grave. It's the stunned silence of witnessing unparalleled human endurance in the face of absolute cosmic isolation.
Well, as we draw this discussion to a close, I maintain that the theological weight of the book of Job rests heavily on the mechanics of the friends' ritual.
The Shiva practice.
Yes. By enacting Shiva, they actively shifted the narrative reality into the realm of Sheol. They treated Job as a lost soul, and in doing so they transformed his physical affliction into a post-mortem judgment scene, making his lament an authentic echo from the abyss.
And I maintain that the profound theological tension relies entirely on Job's biological trap. Bound by God's explicit command in the heavenly council, Job cannot die.
The unbreakable constraint.
Exactly. He is forced to endure the absolute aesthetic of death imposed upon him by his friends, while painfully maintaining his living consciousness. His lament is the tragic, desperate plea of a living man trying to reverse engineer his own creation.
I think what this leaves us with is just a brilliantly ambiguous text. The Hebrew writer uses the deeply ingrained cultural mechanics of the mourning ritual to force us into a highly uncomfortable theological space.
Yes, the ambiguity is entirely deliberate. It's brilliant. It elevates the narrative from a simple folktale of suffering to a staggering 40-chapter exploration of existence, non-existence, and the true nature of divine justice.
Has demonstrated the immense value of reading this text through multiple theological lenses.
It absolutely warrants deep, ongoing exegesis.
It really does. The interplay between lamentation and the realm of the dead in Job is not a settled matter. It is a dynamic space that demands rigorous exploration. When you encounter a cosmological boundary in Scripture, especially the boundary between the living and the dead, don't just assume the line is solid.
Sometimes the friction is the whole point.
Right. Sometimes the most profound theological insights happen precisely when we examine how and why that line is challenged. Thank you for joining us.